The thing people don't understand is that I had the text. 3 words from Lily, time-stamped, sitting right there on my phone before anyone asked me to prove anything. Of course Joel said he believed me. Of course he did. And then stood in the kitchen without asking another question, which I understood perfectly. By then, I had won every argument and lost the only room that mattered. My name is Harriet Vale. I am 33 years old, and I am very good at finding things. Not at parties. Senior compliance analyst is the kind of title that makes people remember they need another drink, so I save it for paperwork. What it actually means is that I sit inside other people's financial decisions and look for what they tried to hide. Patterns that don't hold. Entries that almost make sense. 6 years at Vestal Capital. And I have built my career on one reliable truth. There is always a gap between the stated position and the actual one, and I have an eye for it. Of course, it never occurred to me to turn that eye on myself. Of course. Sunday mornings, Joel and I read the papers in bed for 2 hours without talking. Him on his side, me on mine, the quiet of two people who have calibrated to each other so precisely that they no longer need to fill space. He made the coffee before I was properly awake and brought it with cinnamon, because I mentioned once, 2019, someone else's kitchen table, that I liked it. He remembered. He always remembered the small things and made nothing of the remembering. That Sunday, he asked without looking up from the paper whether I had been sleeping all right. He said I seemed somewhere else lately. I told him I was fine, just work running long. He said he could cancel Saturday's plans with Dev if I needed a quieter weekend. I said it was fine, genuinely, and went back to reading. A few days later, coming home from a long day, I told him work had been hard in a way that wasn't fixable. He asked if I had spoken to my manager. I said it wasn't that kind of hard. He said, "Okay, what can I do?" I said nothing. I just needed to say it out loud. He accepted that, which was him trying, and I registered it somewhere below the line. 8 months into knowing each other, he had spent a week learning the vocabulary of my actual job. Specific questions. Looked up terminology. I tested him once. Asked something he would have had to research. He got it right. I never told him I had done that. The gym bag lived by the front door. A yellow resistance band coiled in the mesh pocket, zip always half undone, the smell of chlorine and dry shampoo. Joel moved it every morning so I could get through the door. 4 years of it automatic. That Thursday I came home with something in the bag that belonged to Lily, not me. She couldn't take it home herself. Her partner was there, so I picked it up from the pharmacy on the way out and put it in the bag without thinking and forgot it before I had changed my shoes. 3 days passed. The bag sat. The morning Joel found the pills, I was making toast. He had picked up the bag to move it, the zip half open, the resistance band on the floor from where it had come loose overnight. And the packet was in the side pocket right there. He was not looking for anything. He just found it. He came to the kitchen. He set the packet on the counter between us carefully and looked at me. He didn't raise his voice. He asked, in the same register he used for everything that cost him something if I could explain this. I got my phone. I found Lily's text, 3 words, time-stamped, sent the evening before my gym session, and held it out to him. He took the phone. He read it. He held it a moment longer than reading required. Then he handed it back and said he believed me. Then he picked up his coffee and looked out the window. 4 minutes. I counted. A professional reflex that doesn't switch off at home. He had said he believed me, and then he had stood at the window for 4 minutes without saying anything else, and I have 7 years of data on what his silences mean. This one, still, eyes averted, jaw settled in the way that meant he was still running something, was the silence he used when he had accepted something on record and hadn't finished reviewing it privately. He was not convinced. He had used the right words and gone somewhere I couldn't follow, and every second of those 4 minutes told me what the words had not. He went to work. The toast had gone cold. Of course I had the proof. I had shown it to him. He had said the right thing. None of that changed what 4 minutes at a window looked like. Bex was in the lobby cafe at 11. I told her Joel had found something in my bag, accused me of something, and that even with proof he didn't really believe my explanation. That was what I said. I left out the part where he had looked at me and said he believed me, because, I told myself, if he said it and didn't mean it, then reporting that he said it would be inaccurate. I know the difference between a stated position and an actual one. What I gave Bex was the real truth, the functional one, the one underneath what he said. Bex said I couldn't let him treat this as something he got to decide was resolved. She ordered a second coffee and looked pleased with both of us in the way she always did when the problem was clean, and she was clearly on the right side of it. Bex had been on my side since we were flatmates at 24, and I had made the mistake of thinking that was evidence she was always right. The next morning she sent a voice note calling him passive-aggressive and saying I deserved better than a man who hid behind civility. I listened to it walking through the lobby turnstile. Passive-aggressive was the word I had been reaching for and hadn't found. Having someone find it for me was a particular kind of relief, and I didn't examine what kind. Declan was at the corner table at noon. He worked 3 floors up at a different firm, and we had been sharing the cafe since last year when the queue was always long. I told him something had happened. He asked what. I gave him the version, the bag, the accusation, the 4 minutes at the window, and he made no suggestions. Asked nothing about what I was going to do. He just said, "Tell me everything." And then he listened, without turning what I said into a project with action items, without asking a single follow-up question designed to move me toward a resolution. When I finished, he said my husband sounded like a man who thought love was a filing system. I laughed. It landed in a place that had been sealed off for weeks, and I laughed before running it through any kind of check. Something noted, at the back of my head, that this was the first time in weeks I had done that. I went back upstairs and didn't examine it further. 3 days later, Declan asked me by message whether I had ever considered that the problem was less about the accusation and more about what it had uncovered. I didn't answer that directly. I told him I knew what the problem was. He said he believed me, and I let the word choice go. That evening, Cara called. I gave her the same version I had given Bex. When I reached the part about making sure people understood what had been said to me, she went quiet. I read the quiet as her working through where her loyalty landed. I know now she was uncomfortable with something else entirely and chose to wait and see and kept choosing that for 2 more weeks until she was asked for a written account and gave one. People tell themselves they are not getting involved. They mean they don't want the cost of speaking while it can still matter. The week moved slowly. Joel was careful with me. The deliberate kind of careful, every measured word a sign that other words were being withheld. One evening he asked whether I was happy. Not with the accusation. With us. He said he could tell I had been somewhere else lately, somewhere I hadn't brought him. It was a real question, the kind he didn't ask often, and the fact that he was asking it now, after the bag, after the kitchen, after 4 days of deliberate civility, made me hear it as strategy rather than sincerity. I told him I would be happier when I stopped feeling like a suspect in my own home. He looked at the space between us in the hallway and said he heard me. Then he made tea and went to the other room, and neither of us said anything else. He left the tea on the counter where I could reach it. Of course he did. Of course. 4 days before Cara's dinner, on the night bus home, I looked at my reflection in the cold window. The version was already assembled in my head. The bag, the accusation, the 4 minutes at the window. I knew how to present these pieces. I do it professionally. I know how to make the abstract specific, how to give the audience something physical to look at. I was not planning anything deliberately. The version was just there, waiting. Of course it would be careful. Of course it would only be what was true. Cara's dinner was on a Friday. 6 of us at the long table, Cara and Tom, Bex, Fiona, Joel's younger sister, who came to Cara's every few months and always sat where she could see the whole room, and me and my husband. I wore the dark green dress I had bought in October and been saving. Getting dressed, I knew this wasn't the right occasion. I put it on anyway. The wine came quickly. The food was good. Between the main course and dessert, Tom made a remark about how well Cara handled pressure, the kind of toast that costs him nothing. And the table smiled. Something in me found the entry point. I said, lightly, and with the tone I use when I want to name a real thing and call it observation, that I had been thinking about how marriage worked, about how some men developed a talent for finding problems in their wives that weren't there, about how a controlling husband looked for evidence of crimes when he ran out of other reasons to be unhappy. I didn't name him. I didn't name the bag. I didn't describe the kitchen or the 4 minutes or the window. I described what it was like to be treated as someone who needed explaining in their own home, and everyone at that table who knew Joel understood exactly who I was describing. I had decided, getting dressed, that this wasn't my fault. Bex laughed. Tom gave a short, uncertain sound. Cara looked at her wine glass and didn't look up from it. Fiona put her fork down on the edge of her plate, slowly, with more deliberateness than putting a fork down requires. The silence that followed lasted 2 or 3 seconds, short but directional. Then Cara's end of the table resumed something unrelated, and people were grateful for the permission. That kind of silence always moves somewhere. I watched it move toward Joel and watched him not react, and I took his stillness as the clearest confirmation I had received yet. Joel was across from me. He sat with his expression arranged in the careful neutral he wore when he was making himself a still point, absorbing something without showing it move. His non-response was the most useful thing in the room. He had nothing to say because he knew I was right. I said he had seen something in my bag and decided who I was. I said it and heard the table receive it. The bag became what I needed it to be, the physical document that anchored the whole case. Between that sentence and the next, my voice did something I hadn't planned. A fraction of a second where something below the performance was visible. Something raw, not built for this room. I covered it with a laugh before it could settle. Bex looked at me for half a second too long, then looked away. I kept talking and the moment passed. On the pavement outside Cara's door, waiting for the cars, Bex said, "That was bold." Same word as before. Same careful placement. Not, "You were right." Not, "He had it coming." Bold. I let it land without turning it over. After dessert, while coats were being found in the hallway, Joel appeared beside me. No raised voice. He asked quietly if we could step outside for one conversation. Just us, away from the table. I understood that immediately as containment. He wanted the room cleared before he responded, so whatever he said happened without witnesses. I told him I was getting my coat. At home, we had taken separate cars. He was in the kitchen with a glass of water when I arrived. Not quite waiting for me, just standing there. He said the dinner hadn't felt like us at our best. I told him I had been honest, and that wasn't the same as worst, and that if what I said had embarrassed him, then perhaps he should ask himself why it landed so easily with people who knew him. He said, quietly, not as an accusation, that he thought I had wanted people there so the version I told would have witnesses. I told him that was what a man said when he couldn't win the argument on its merits. His face changed, and then it didn't. He put the glass in the sink and ran the tap for a moment and turned it off. He stood there with his hands on the edge of the counter, not gripping it, just resting. Then he went to bed without saying anything else. In the lobby cafe the next morning, Bex said it again. Bold. I had started to hear the shape of what she wasn't saying. I let the word land anyway and went upstairs. Outside Cara's door the night before, I had watched Fiona and Cara speaking near the entrance. Close, quiet, the kind of conversation that leans in. I couldn't hear it. I couldn't read what was on Cara's face from 15 feet away, only that something was there. Fiona had not looked toward me. I got in my car and told myself it was something unrelated. I counted 11 minutes before I believed it. 3 days after the dinner, Fiona knocked on the flat door. Joel was at work. She hadn't called ahead. She came in when I opened the door and sat at the kitchen table without being asked, the way people do when they have been somewhere often enough that waiting to be invited would be dishonest. She brought nothing with her. She told me, without raising her voice, looking at me the whole time, that the story I had told at Kara's dinner was designed. She said she wasn't there to defend Joel. She said defending him wasn't the point. She said she had watched me use rooms to manage how people understood things, and she had watched him let it happen because he didn't know how to stop it, and she was saying this now because nobody else would. I told her she was his sister, which meant she couldn't be neutral, which meant her analysis was compromised from the start. She said she was aware of that. She said it anyway. Then she left. Of course she had waited until he was out. Of course she had chosen to have me alone. I spent the rest of the afternoon reconstructing exactly how she had timed it, which was easier than sitting with what she had said. And I am very good at the easier thing. She had used the word designed. I kept returning to it. She hadn't said cruel or unfair or wrong. She said designed. The word that meant plan to produce a specific outcome. The word from my own vocabulary, applied to me. I put it somewhere I wouldn't have to look at it and went to make tea. 2 mornings later, I came to the kitchen and found a note on the counter. Joel had left it on the back of a shopping receipt, in his ordinary handwriting. It said he was trying to understand what I had needed and why I hadn't thought he could give it. I read it. Then I photographed it. He was preparing his version. The note was the opening document in a file he intended to produce at some point to someone who would ask whether he had tried. 6 years of watching people create paper trails that supported their account of events, and I knew exactly what this was. I photographed it as accurate documentation. I put the phone in my pocket and made coffee. That evening I sat across from him and said, with the measured voice I had been practicing, that I could see the bag situation hadn't been ideal to leave unexplained, and that I understood his reaction had been human. I said I hadn't given him what he needed to be certain. I framed it as meeting him halfway. He said, "That's not what I asked you. Not with heat." The same even delivery he used for most things. The calibration in what I had offered was visible to him from across the table, and in seeing it he had become more certain of something, not less. The attempt had made things worse. I noted that and moved on. Kara had messaged twice that week. Once about a scarf she had left at her own dinner, once a photo of a dog she passed on the way to work. Both were the kind of messages she would have sent before. Neither of them asked how things were going. That specific kind of not asking has its own texture, and I noticed it the second time. He came home one evening with a manila folder he took straight to the desk in the second bedroom. I was not meant to see it. He had gone directly there. But I went in to charge my phone and it was on the desk. Tabs. Printed pages. One of the tabs had a date 3 weeks earlier, before the dinner. He had been preparing something before the dinner. I moved it 3 inches to the left. Not to open it. Just to let myself know I had. The gym bag was by the front door when I left for work the next morning. He had moved it every morning for 4 years. That morning he left without touching it. I stepped around it and told myself he was making a point. That afternoon, I drove to my childhood home to pick up a box of old tax records. My mother was out. I went through the back room, found the box, and at the bottom of it, found a photograph I didn't remember being taken. My father. Standing in a kitchen I didn't recognize, not ours, somewhere else. He was holding a mug. Nothing on his face. Just standing there. Ordinary before anything had been said about him publicly, before 3 years of being described in rooms, before the story had been told so many times and to so many people that it replaced him entirely in the minds of everyone who had known him. I held the photograph and stood there. I thought about the man my mother had described in those years, cold, secretive, someone who retreated when she tried to reach him, who stared out of windows and gave careful civil answers and organized things in rooms she couldn't see. How she had taken that private language, the language of a man who processed things internally, who showed care through preparation and presence and small remembered details, and made it public evidence. How she had stood in doorways at dinner tables and described him to people who trusted her version because she told it first, and told it often, and told it with the particular authority of someone who had been there. How she had told it in rooms until it was the only version that survived. The door opened. Not guilt, something more specific and harder to refuse. The version I had been building, the case I had been presenting, the careful public story I had been distributing to people who trusted me. I held all of it against the photograph and saw its shape. My father was innocent. I am innocent. I have Lily's text. The difference is real and enormous and matters. I put the photograph face down in the box. I closed the box. I carried it to the car. Bex had not responded to a message I sent that afternoon. 2 weeks earlier, she would have answered before the notification cleared. I checked her Instagram and she had posted something 40 minutes earlier. I put my phone in my pocket and drove home. That night, lying in the bedroom, I listened to Joel in the other room. Quiet and organised, the particular sound of a person who needs his hands occupied. 2 hours. When he came to bed, he didn't check whether I was awake. He didn't say goodnight. 4 years, every night. Both of those things. Neither of them that night. I lay still and counted his breaths until they changed. On Tuesday morning, I posted on Instagram. I had drafted it 4 times. The version I used said, "There is a particular kind of loneliness in being accused of things you didn't do by someone who was supposed to know better. Deciding not to apologize for having your own life." I didn't tag anyone. I didn't name anything. 17 mutual followers at minimum, and at least 3 of them would show him before noon. I pressed post before I could make it a decision, and then I went to make coffee, and by the time the coffee was ready, it had already happened. Sasha, from my floor at Vestal, left a flame emoji on it within the hour and deleted it before lunch. That was the only response from anyone who knew both of us. I heard Joel's key in the lock that evening at the same time a notification came in from someone I barely knew who had left something vague and encouraging on the post. I put the phone face down on the counter when he came through the door. He put his bag by the wall and came to the kitchen and sat down. He looked at me and said, once no raised voice, no heat, that I had been building a version of our marriage in which I was innocent before I had told him what I was actually doing. He said it once and did not repeat it, and the not repeating was worse than saying it again would have been. I waited 2 seconds, 3. Then I said, "You went quiet for 4 days after your promotion was rejected. 4 days. I found out from your colleague in a pub, 3 weeks after it happened. You never once made me the person you brought things to first. That was the distance. That is where it started. Not the bag. You." 3 texts I had sent him in those weeks after the pub. 1 explanation I had offered that he hadn't asked for. The date stamped so clearly in my memory I could still describe the table we had been sitting at, the particular way the light hit the glass in front of him when he confirmed it. He looked at the floor. Something in his face did something I had not seen in 7 years. Not defeat, not anger. Something quieter and further back. Something that had already made a decision before this conversation started. He said, "You are right. And we are still here." I looked at him. He was right that I was right. He had said so and then not moved, and I took that as proof that being right had made no difference. He was acknowledging the promotion, acknowledging the 4 days, acknowledging the pub, and then folding it into the conversation like a document he had processed and filed and was moving past. I didn't consider the other interpretation, which was that a person can acknowledge a wrong they committed and still not hand over everything they were trying to protect. I heard that as deflection. He was absorbing the accusation and refusing to let it cancel the rest, which was exactly what he always did, which was the specific thing I had always found unbearable. He was right, and he acknowledged it, and he refused to let it be enough. I called that his flaw. He stood up and said he was going to handle things properly. The same voice, the same register, like a quarterly filing had gone past due, and he had just decided to stop delaying it. He picked up his mug and rinsed it, set it on the rack, dried his hands on the kitchen towel. He went to the other room. I stood in the kitchen with a thought that lasted 4 or 5 seconds before I covered it. I find what people hide. I document the gap between the stated position and the actual one. For 3 weeks, I had been doing exactly that. Gathering, managing, controlling what left our marriage and what entered it, building the case the way I always built cases. I had called it self-defense. I had called it honesty. I had called it having a right to my experience. I picked up my phone. 3 messages to Bex. First, can you call me? Second, 20 minutes later, I need to talk. Third, an hour after that, are you around? The first got a response, a single emoji, something between sympathy and discomfort. The second and third got nothing. She had watched an Instagram story I had posted that day, a restaurant photo nothing to do with any of this, and had not reacted. Bex was there. She had simply become unavailable. I went to Sasha's desk and said something had happened. She looked up and said she had a call starting in 4 minutes. Her face was neutral in a way that was not unkind, just professional. I went back to my own desk. Declan replied to a message I sent later that evening. He thought he needed to be less available to all of this for a bit. He said all of this, which meant the situation. Of course that was what he meant. Of course he had his own things. In the other room, Joel was organised. I could hear it. Drawers opened and closed in the right sequence, the deliberate sound of someone who had been ready for this longer than I had. I was in the kitchen going faster, phone in hand, drafting things, refreshing threads. He was decelerating. I was accelerating. The gap between us was not anger. It was the quiet of a man who had made a decision and was no longer asking anyone to participate in it. I sent one more message before bed, to Cara, asking if she wanted coffee that week. She didn't respond that evening. I told myself she was asleep. Then I lay in the bedroom and listened to Joel reorganize the filing cabinet. 45 minutes. The specific sound of folders being moved into a new order, paper against paper, tabs clicking into place, the small finality of a drawer being closed. I lay there counting. 6 drawers. Each one opened and closed twice, the last one 3 times. When the sound stopped, the flat was the quietest it had been in 3 weeks. Thursday morning, 9:14 a.m. The lobby of Vestal Capital. I came through the main entrance with my security pass out, the turnstile ahead, wax polish and recycled air, and someone's abandoned coffee at the front desk. An ordinary Thursday morning, completely ordinary. A man I didn't know said my name. Both names. Harriet Vale, formally, the way a name is used when it is being confirmed rather than spoken to. He waited for me to stop. He confirmed who I was. He handed me an envelope. Inside, petition for dissolution of marriage with a motion for temporary orders. Orders covering financial preservation of joint accounts, exclusive apartment use pending the first hearing, and all communication through a designated application. First hearing, June 12, 9:30 a.m. County Family Court. Joel's full name printed beside mine on the first page. The turnstile clicked twice behind me. Other people going through ordinary Thursday. I read the first page and then read it again. Someone from accounts said good morning and kept walking. I signed for the envelope and stood there. Then I walked to the lift. Sasha was at her desk when I arrived at my floor. She looked at my face. She didn't ask. Outside the glass front of the building, I had seen them before turning away. Joel and Fiona on the pavement talking to each other close, the way people wait for something to be over. 9 seconds. Neither of them looked toward the building. I turned and walked to the lift, and that was the last time any of that was mine to watch. A week later, in the mediator's office, Clara Benson went through the evidence packet without commentary. The Instagram post. Screenshots from the group chat. My version, sent to Cara, forwarded without additional text. Cara's written statement. Tom's. Fiona's. Phone records showing the pattern of my contact with Declan. Nothing was new. Every item was something I had produced, in front of people over 3 weeks. I told Clara the dinner had been honest. She asked why an honest account needed a version sent to the group chat ahead of it. My version did not land. That afternoon, Declan sent a message saying he had been asked to cover the Edinburgh office for 3 months and thought some distance from all of this would be good for everyone. No confrontation. No acknowledgement of what the past weeks had been. A clean, cost-free exit before anything could cost him. I moved into a short-let studio above a pharmacy on a street I had been down twice before, and the stairwell smelled of acetone and something damp that I stopped noticing after a week. The joint accounts were frozen pending the June 12th hearing, and I did the arithmetic on personal savings that same afternoon. Cara did not respond to a message sent 2 weeks later. Fiona's number rang once and went to nothing. Sasha said hello at the turnstile and kept walking. Declan sent one more message from Edinburgh. Hope you are okay. And when I didn't answer, he sent nothing else. My compliance manager asked me into her office the Monday after the lobby incident and said building security had flagged the service event and that my client-facing access was paused until the matter resolved. I had Lily's text from the beginning. 3 words. Time-stamped. Proof I was innocent of what he found. He said he believed me. He read that text in the kitchen and looked at me and said, "Okay, I believe you." Then he went quiet, and I counted 4 minutes, and I decided his belief was not worth having if it arrived without witnesses, without cost, without any sound where anyone could hear it. I turned a man who believed me into the subject of a case I presented to everyone except him. I called it self-defense. I had the text the whole time. The gym bag is still by the front door of the flat. I saw it when I came to collect my boxes. I didn't take it. I was right about the pills, and I have the proof, and that is the only room in which any of this still holds.